My late wife, Trish, and I formed Us Against Alzheimer's in 2010 because we were frustrated and angry at the lack of pace and energy and passion in the Alzheimer's movement. Her grandmother had died of this disease, her mother had died of this disease. We were joined by a small group of friends who themselves had experienced Alzheimer's in their families. We collaborate with researchers, with corporations, with other non-governmental organizations and nonprofits, because we want everybody to win.
My mother was diagnosed and I became very well acquainted with the disease. We began by bringing together those most affected, including women, because women are 2/3 of the patients and 2/3 of the caregivers. We brought together grassroots supporters and influential women and convened conversations to build momentum. We formed partnerships with world-class organizations, companies, institutions, and thought leaders to create awareness and quickly become one of the first women's Alzheimer's movements called Women Against Alzheimer's.
From the start, we focused on inequities in brain health, because Black Americans are twice as likely as whites to develop Alzheimer's. We established African Americans Against Alzheimer's to promote brain health, research equity, and healthy aging among the Black community.
We built the first ever coalition of community-based organizations coordinating Alzheimer's awareness and brain health promotion efforts in the Latino community. Latinos Against Alzheimer's mobilizes researchers, advocates, and community leaders to take action on brain health disparities impacting millions of Latino families.
We have all lived the Alzheimer's journey. We know its pain points, the details of the challenges and how the disease confounds every patient, every caregiver, and their families. We've also navigated the stark reality that no matter what we do or what we did at home or with a loved one in a facility, the disease always wins.
We started the Global Alzheimer's Platform to address the cost, duration, and frankly, the inefficiency of Alzheimer's clinical trials. With industry, clinical trial participant, and philanthropic support, we created a network in North America of more than 80 research sites to speed the delivery of innovative therapies to those afflicted with Alzheimer's.
We have increased the amount of research investment annually at NIH from $440 million a year to over $2.8 billion a year. We have a clinical trial network that is speeding clinical innovations to market. And we're going to have 3 drugs on market next year for the first time since 2004. Our team is working harder than ever for the millions of Americans who are suffering from Alzheimer's, and indeed for those that have experienced COVID in their families and Alzheimer's as well. Because of them, thanks to you, there's hope on the horizon.
Join us.
Come join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
I am fighting for all the caregivers across the nation who are working tirelessly around the clock to take care of their loved ones while also balancing their health.
I'm fighting for people like myself who are living with Alzheimer's or a related dementia.
I am fighting for all, so no one else must live this dreadful disease.
If there was no Alzheimer's, there would be millions of people who would still be able to hug their mom, their dad, their grandma, their grandpa, and I'm fighting for those people so that they can continue hugging them.
Tonight, we're fighting for a care and a cure in memory of the 8 family members for whom we and our immediate families cared, who either had Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia.
I'm fighting for the possibility to spread happiness despite having this disease.
I am fighting for a future we can all remember.
I'm fighting in memory of my father, Vic Coda, who we lost this past July to dementia.
I'm fighting for a cure in honor of my dad, who died of AD 3 years ago.
I'm fighting for a world without Alzheimer's for all communities, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or zip code.
I am fighting for my grandparents who I have cared for, and for all other millennials and Gen Zs who will disproportionately bear the burden of Alzheimer's.
I'm fighting for my mom, my dad, my father-in-law, who all died with dementia.
I'm fighting for the right to have my body not outlive my mind.
Studies suggest that Latinos in the U.S. are 1.5 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease than white non-Latinos. If there was no Alzheimer's, our abuelitos would live a better quality of life. They are whom I'm fighting for.
I fight in memory of my mother and father, and in honor of all those people who made my parents struggle with dementia just a little bit easier.
I am fighting for my grandfather who suffered from dementia, but also for the almost 6 million people suffering from the disease in the US and the over 15 million unpaid family caregivers.
I am fighting in memory of my parents.
We are fighting for my mom and all those who live with this disease. We need more research. We need more resources and tools to support people living with all forms of dementia and their family caregivers.
3 generations of my family over 40 years, I'm fighting against this disease for my kids and my grandkids. Join us. Welcome to the 2021 National Alzheimer's Summit. This is the most exciting year since Us Against Alzheimer's was created in 2010. I've always wanted to open our summit with these words: hope is finally here. The FDA's approval of the first ever disease-modifying treatment marks a seminal moment in the battle to end this disease. By delaying disease progression for people in the early stages of Alzheimer's, many may be able to live independently and perform daily activities longer. And the approval is already spurring more innovation by other companies in this promising first class of drugs, promising improvements over Aduhelm. But as we know, this class of drug will be followed by subsequent classes of drugs that will be even more powerful than these amyloid-lowering drugs. All of this will mean more treatment options and choices for patients. But the innovation is occurring not just in drugs, but also in new blood-based tests and exciting digital assessment tools essential to diagnosing this disease earlier in its course, potentially decades before symptoms. Doing that will enable future disease-slowing medicines or even vaccines to be administered before symptoms occur and potentially to prevent symptoms of Alzheimer's entirely. That's the vision, preventing Alzheimer's through new, innovative medicines. But that's not yet the reality. We know where we want to go, but we must also recognize just how far we have yet to go. And the theme of this conference, are we ready to stop Alzheimer's? No, hell no, we're not ready. In fact, the controversies and challenges seen over just the last few months show that all of us have a great deal more work to get there. When we formed Us Against Alzheimer's 11 years ago, we created an action-oriented organization that runs to the hardest issues in this fight. It uses the power of the voice of patients to bring together sectors and people, all of us, to work collaboratively towards the goal that all sectors, all companies, all governments, and all researchers share, stopping Alzheimer's, but which no single company, no single government, no single researcher can do on their own. How do we do our work? Knowing what's going on in the field, understanding and getting input from a wide variety of sources, we identify through thought leadership a strategic barrier. We then convene stakeholders across governments, research institutions, and companies to lay out agreed solutions that no one stakeholder could execute on their own. This incubation process catalyzes innovative approaches to deep set problems and new ways of collaboration to solve those problems. As initiatives germinate, we assess if they can be funded and executed effectively within Us Against Alzheimer's, or better spun off and funded and executed in a sister organization, such as our Global Alzheimer's Platform Foundation that works on clinical trials, or our Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, which is now working globally. Throughout all of this, we are guided by the needs of people living with the disease and their caregivers. With that very much in mind, we want every company to develop a successful drug, every scientist to get the Nobel Prize, and every nation to be the fastest in enabling families to get interventions to citizens at risk for Alzheimer's. So how do we see the work ahead to get us ready to stop Alzheimer's? We strongly supported the FDA's approval of Aduhelm as a drug that is effective in lowering amyloid in the brain and proves the promise of providing a clinical benefit to patients. At the same time, we've raised strong concerns about the affordability of the drug for patients of this treatment and of the essential diagnostic tests needed to determine whether one is qualified and appropriate to get the drug. We have called for a speedy clinical trial to confirm the clinical benefit of Aduhelm. We have urged the conclusion of a much more diverse population in that confirmatory trial. And we ourselves are constructing a patient-driven study platform to assess the real-world impact of not just Aduhelm, but other drugs in the pipeline as they come through the pipeline and are available to our families. The announced price for Aduhelm of $56,000 a year, plus the cost of office visits, diagnostics, and other tests, will limit the availability of this first-in-class treatment to only the wealthiest Americans, unless the company and insurers, including Medicare, work together to keep patients' out-of-pocket costs low. We're actively advocating with Medicare to cover the cost of the entire class of amyloid targeting treatments and of the necessary diagnostics to determine whether an individual has amyloid in their brain. The controversies over the last few months have held back use of this promising treatment. Doubts have been raised about its safety and efficacy. Reviews and investigations are underway about the regulatory review. Meanwhile, patients and doctors are wondering whether they should start on a drug that may not be reimbursed by Medicare. We are confident that those reviews, that confirmatory trial, and the coverage issues will be resolved in the coming months. The approval of Aduhelm, however, and the progress being made with other treatments in the pipeline have put a brighter spotlight on other critical issues that are essential in the fight against Alzheimer's. And that's where we are focused, the toughest problems. First, it's essential that access to research, treatments, and diagnostics be available for all Americans, especially for low-income populations and for women and communities of color that have a prior prevalence of Alzheimer's. Our Center for Brain Health Equity is on that case. In 2021, our center has secured commitments from industry to set more ambitious goals to recruit people of color into potentially life-saving clinical trials. Second, earlier detection and diagnosis has never been more important, especially when these new treatments work best in patients with mild cognitive impairment or in the early stages of Alzheimer's, or in the future for persons with the disease, but before symptoms are evident, a period that we now know is up to 20 years. The BioHermes study at our Global Alzheimer's Platform sister organization is comparing new blood-based diagnostics and digital assessment tools in a study with the current but expensive and relatively inaccessible PET scan imaging technology to determine what of these new technologies and innovations is most appropriate for early detection. Third, with earlier detection, healthcare systems can take advantage of new evidence regarding the value of risk reduction and lifestyle interventions, studies showing that up to 40% of dementia cases can be prevented. Our work has led to the recommendation by a federal advisory council that the national plan add a risk reduction goal, a recommendation now on the desk of Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra. Fourth, our seminal work in studying what matters most to patients is getting the attention of policymakers and decision makers. The FDA looked to those patient perspectives in determining that patients were willing to undertake a degree of risk in making the choice on whether or not to try a new treatment. Finally, Us Against Alzheimer's has been warning for several years that the US and global healthcare systems are not ready for an Alzheimer's treatment. Regrettably, the events of the last several months have proven that it's still the case that our healthcare systems cannot deal with brain conditions or memory loss. So we have to run to that challenge. How are we doing that? Healthcare providers must be trained, tooled, and incented to detect and diagnose Alzheimer's. So we're working with Congress, physicians, and Medicare to solve that issue. Patients must be willing to raise the question of their memory concerns and their brain health with their doctors and nurses. Working with diverse medical experts and technical experts at Amazon Web Services, we have launched our free Brain Guide platform at mybrainguide.org, mybrainguide.org, where people can take a private memory questionnaire for themselves or a loved one and obtain tailored resources and information for use in their conversations with their doctors. Government and private insurance payers have a vital role in incenting physicians to diagnose Alzheimer's and ensuring that treatments and diagnostics are affordable and accessible to everyone. Before treatments are widely available and affordable, policymakers must support families in need today. We are deeply involved in urging Congress to approve paid family and medical leave to dementia caregivers who too often must choose between their job and caring for their loved one. I will always want the pace of progress against Alzheimer's to be faster, but I've never been as optimistic about the future in the cure of this disease as I am now. But our work is far, far from being done. As a nation and as an organization, we have a lot of work to do to get the right patient, the right drug, at the right time, at the right stage of disease. So we're not ready yet as a nation or a world to stop Alzheimer's. We must get ourselves ready. We have the capacity to get ready. Now we must act to get ourselves ready. I'm very proud of this organization, built on a culture of passion, collaboration, and agile entrepreneurship. We may be smaller than others, but we punch way, way above our weight class. So on behalf of my co-founders, John Dwyer and Merrill Comer, and of course, my late wife, Trish, we want to thank publicly the mighty Alzheimer's, Us Against Alzheimer's team. Let's get started together. Thanks for listening. The Us Against Alzheimer's community is deeply saddened by the passing earlier this month of our board member, Marilyn Glosser. Nobody believed more in this cause than Marilyn, and the fight against Alzheimer's would not be where it is today without her. Our thoughts are with her husband, Michael, and their family. Like so many people, Marilyn had a family connection to this disease. She lost her father to Alzheimer's in 2004. And so she experienced firsthand how Alzheimer's affects the person living with the disease, but also their family caregivers. When Marilyn joined our board in 2018, she was a strong supporter for more attention to prevention methods against Alzheimer's, especially understanding how lifestyle and nutritional choices can impact neurological, cancer, and heart-related diseases. Our organization's work on strengthening brain health, risk reduction, and prevention is a testament to her leadership. Her passing is a loss for all of us at Us Against Alzheimer's and throughout the Alzheimer's movement.
Thanks, George. Hi, I'm Russ Paulson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Us Against Alzheimer's. And hope is here, but there is so much left to do to make sure that that hope becomes a reality, and a reality for everyone. The National Alzheimer's Summit gives us a chance to come together every year and reflect on what we've done, what we've learned, and what we have yet to achieve together in our fight to end Alzheimer's. And this year, we're focused on a single question, and I hope it's a provocative question. Are we ready to end Alzheimer's? You've already heard George's thoughts, but what do others think? And if we're not ready, what do we need to do? Our sessions will take deeper looks into several aspects of the questions. What is in the pharmaceutical pipeline? And what are the hurdles to making that pipeline more full, faster flowing? What can we do today to reduce our risk of Alzheimer's and other dementias tomorrow? And what stands in the way of our doing more of that? What can public health do to help? And are they doing it? We've seen our public health system more clearly than we have in decades in this fight against COVID. But what about against a non-infectious disease like Alzheimer's? And how about technology? How might new developments change the way we detect and diagnose, manage, even prevent Alzheimer's? What's missing? Who is missing? Until we stop the disease, what about caregivers, the support they need? What more can we do? Finally, for each one of these questions, how do we ensure that the benefits flow to everyone, especially historically underserved populations? In just a few minutes, we're going to look at the state of drug development. We know that there is not a miracle drug out there. There is no one-size-fits-all pill. There's no shot that ends Alzheimer's that's in the pipeline. What is out there? What's coming? And what are the hurdles to have more, maybe even more preventatives, more targeted drugs? That's just in a few minutes. At 2:30 Eastern, a panel of experts on risk reduction. Scientists are pretty sure now that we can actually prevent or at least delay Alzheimer's in some people. 3:30 Eastern today, a special treat. Dolores Huerta on economic justice for caregivers, because until we really do end Alzheimer's, most of the care for people with the disease will be unpaid and almost all the rest will be underpaid. This is the harsh reality that disproportionately falls on the shoulders of women of color. And is that just something we have to live with? Tonight we celebrate We celebrate progress. While we know we have a long way to go, there's a lot of goodness in the rearview mirror as well. And tonight we'll pause and we'll be grateful. And here's something that I never expected that I would be able to say in my life. Billy Crystal will be joining us in the celebration, along with Lisa Gibbons, Josh Henkin, and other artists who've become part of the us in Us Against Alzheimer's. Join us tonight for that. And if you're inspired by the stories you hear today or tonight, I hope you'll consider making a gift to help us with our future work. And then tomorrow, come back to us, 1 o'clock Eastern time. Journalist, author, longtime caregiver, and Us Against Alzheimer's co-founder, Meryl Comer, will kick things off. At 1:30 then tomorrow, we talk tech, digital tech, blood biomarker tech. How does all this tech get designed? And who for? Then at 2:30 tomorrow, we're honored to have two powerhouses in public health and health equity with us. Former Surgeons General, Dr. Joyce Sloan Elders and Dr. David Satcher will be here to talk about what public health is doing, could be doing, should be doing, may be doing in the future, so that we are all ready to end Alzheimer's for all communities. And then I'll wrap things up both days. And throughout our summit, you'll be hearing from people living with the disease, their caregivers, because their lives, their perspectives guide the work that we do. We must ensure that the voices of people with Alzheimer's are always heard. So that's what we're going to be doing. We'll be kicking things off in just a few minutes at 1:30 Eastern. Thanks.
Us Against Alzheimer's offers its deepest gratitude to the sponsors of our National Alzheimer's Summit. A special thank you to our 2021 Premier Summit sponsors, Acadia, Biogen, Eisai, and Otsuka. And to our platinum level sponsors, Genentech and Home Instead. We also value and appreciate all of our gold and silver sponsors as well. This support from all our generous sponsors helps make possible the National Alzheimer's Summit. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Up next at 1:30, our Pipeline to Progress Town Hall.
Hi, my name is Daisy Duarte. I'm a clinical trial participant with the Diane TU and Waju University. I feel it's important to be in a clinical trial because as a Latina woman, I feel that not too many Latinos are involved in clinical trials. And I think it'll be a quicker way of finding some kind of medication for the Latino community. My experience with the clinical trial has been good. I've been in it for 9 years now, and I feel that it's showing some kind of progress, even though I'm not symptomatic, but I see it in other people that are in the trial. And I believe that we are going to find a cure for this disease. Without research, we're not going to find anything. With research, what works for a Caucasian, it doesn't mean it's medication-wise isn't going to help for a Latino or African American. So I believe that the more we have more involvement in all cultures, we will find a cure.
And thanks very much to Daisy and other clinical trial participants for their time. It means so much to research. Hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Kahn. I'm the founder of Being Patient. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a journalist who has a mom with Alzheimer's disease. When I was working at the Wall Street Journal, my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And it started the journey for me to discover more information and understand questions like, what have we learned in the last 10 years? And how far away are we from a cure? How is science approaching the search for a cure? Surprisingly, it was very hard for me to find this type of information. So I decided to quit my job at the Journal and launch Being Patient. I called many scientists around the world, from Asia, Europe to the US, to understand more about the complexities of Alzheimer's and what we've learned so far, discovering information like the fact that beta amyloid plaque can be seen in the brain up to a decade or more before one person sees a symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. A lot of this information helped me to understand research, and it was comforting in a way. So that's what led me on this journey, and apropos to my experience and to the topic of today's panel, the pipeline. Today, we are going to have the pipeline to progress, and we have a very distinguished who's who of in drug discovery and development with us today. I'm pleased to introduce Phyllis Farrell. She is the global head of external engagement for Alzheimer's disease at Eli Lilly and Company. Michael Irizarry, who is the Vice President of Clinical Research and the Deputy Chief Clinical Officer of Neurology Business Group at Eisai. Brian Kelly is the President of Payer and Provider Solutions at IQVIA. And Dominic Walsh is the head of Neurodegenerative Diseases Research Unit at Biogen. Welcome, everyone, to our panel, and I'm sure it's going to be a really interesting conversation. As I mentioned earlier, I'm always looking for the answers of where we are in the scientific research. 2021 obviously will not only be remembered for COVID, but for those of us impacted with impacted by Alzheimer's disease, it will also be remembered as the year that the FDA approved the first drug aimed at the pathology of Alzheimer's disease. Although it was a rocky start, Aduhelm was approved, and it has now opened the door to many other later stage clinical trials that are going on, in particular with drugs ending in MAB, which stands for monoclonal antibodies, which target mostly the beta amyloid plaque in the brain. So it was a great change for drug discovery and really opening new doors. But it wasn't the only thing going on in the landscape. We also have a lot of different ways to diagnose now. New biomarkers are being discovered. So I would say 2021 was a good year for movement on the pipeline and taking us closer. But really what I want to hear is from your perspective, from pharma's point of view, what was 2021? Let's look back and say, what is the biggest change that you see in terms of moving forward in development? And Phyllis, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Deborah. And thanks for being here with us and sharing your personal story. So many of us have been impacted. So I think when I look back at the progress we've made just in the last 5 to 10 years, so Lily's been at this for over 35 years, but I've only been with the team for about 10. And when I look back, we have made so much progress in understanding the pathology of this disease, understanding how do we study the disease. So typically in pharmaceutical drug development, the trial design is very, very clear, and you're just putting a molecule in to see if it's going to do what you want it to do. In our case, in Alzheimer's disease, we were trying to figure out how to study the drugs at the same time we were discovering the drugs. So when we started the Expedition 3 study on solanezumab many years ago, we'd already completed 4 phase 3 studies at that time in Alzheimer's disease. But those 4 studies, as you mentioned, Deborah, they didn't measure amyloid. So we went back and looked later at those studies and realized through some sampling that 30% of the people in those studies didn't actually have amyloid pathology, which means they didn't have Alzheimer's disease. And it probably meant that an anti-amyloid therapy wasn't going to work. So when you think about just that change alone, and now, of course, we've got the advent of the ability to see tau pathology in the brain. And so there's a couple of really big changes that have happened in this last 5 years. And as a field, we're sharing that across all of our pharmaceutical collaborators and research collaborators to make sure we all benefit. The first is that we've probably been studying this drug too late. So just like oncology, you don't want to start therapy at stage 4. You're going to make more impact if you started at stage 0 or stage 1. And in Alzheimer's disease, as you mentioned, we were catching this disease much, much, much too late. So I think that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is the progress in this pathology in the brain, amyloid and tau pathology. Once again, potentially another oncology analysis or analogy. We're able now to really get at the pathology in the brain and measure that pathology in a real way so that we can minimize the variability that you might otherwise see in cognitive symptoms. These are huge strides forward.
Michael, would you agree with that? I mean, we're hearing so much about the discovery of new biomarkers. We're even finding them in the blood. Blood tests are coming out. How important is the role of biomarkers in terms of, identifying patients for trials and actually choosing specific treatments?
Yeah, I would agree with Phyllis that the advances in biomarkers over the past 10 to 20 years has really been remarkable and has helped us better define the pathophysiology of Alzheimer's disease. So that the concept is expanded from a clinical concept of dementia and progressive cognitive and functional impairment to a biological conception of a disease characterized by early amyloid deposition, which then seems to trigger the spread of tau and neurofibrillary tangles and then neurodegeneration. And we have biomarkers now that remarkably can see these pathologies in living people. So Phyllis had mentioned the amyloid PET and the tau PET that can give us a sense of where the amyloid is and where the tangles are in the brain and the timing of when they occur. And now we can see those same pathologies reflected in changes in blood tests. So now amyloid beta protein fragments can be measured in blood tests, phospho-tau fragments can be measured in blood tests, and these correlate with the amount of pathology in the brain. And these are already being incorporated in clinical trials to help select patients, to stage patients, and to identify specific treatments or treatment regimens for patients. Phyllis mentioned that we realized that 20 or 30% of people that we thought clinically had Alzheimer's actually did not have amyloid. And conversely, we've also seen that amyloid begins 15 years or so before the onset of symptoms. So we can now identify cognitively normal individuals that have elevated amyloid and have started clinical trials in trying to treat at that period before there's significant irreversible neurodegeneration. So these are clinical trials in so-called preclinical Alzheimer's disease, where amyloid is identified, elevated amyloid is identified either through PET or even blood tests or CSF, and treatments initiated. And these are long-term studies to understand if this can prevent eventual cognitive decline or progression of Alzheimer's pathology.
Okay, and I should have announced earlier that we have a way for our audience to ask questions. We're getting questions already. Thank you very much for those. So obviously some of you know that you can ask any questions you want during our conversation. So this is a question on being patient. We often get questions from people who really need to know the basics, right? And as science is debating what the right target is, Being Patient recently put together a chart where it's now much more diversified. I mean, the majority is still going after beta amyloid, but we have tau, we have modulating inflammation. We even have people going after microbes to understand whether or not that's a target to prevent the disease from spreading. So this person is actually asking, if you have a very basic question, which comes up a lot, if you have amyloid in your brain, does that mean you 100% have Alzheimer's? And I'd like to also say, the other add to that by saying, if you don't have Alzheimer's in your brain, does that mean you don't have Alzheimer's? So, let's start with the basics. I'm kind of throwing it out. Someone raise your hand and say, I can answer this one, because I know you all have an opinion or can answer it. So the floor is open.
I'll maybe pick up on something that both Phyllis and Michael said, and that is, how we better understand the disease. I think if you initially framed your question in terms of over the last 5 years, this is not an understanding that's been obtained over the last 5 years. This is an understanding that we've developed over decades. And I think one of the big advances recently was actually not so much scientific, but actually a formulation of what we already knew. And that was the 2018 guidelines that the FDA issued, where they actually defined Alzheimer's disease by its pathological hallmarks. Now, that connected two very distinct processes. What we see at postmortem in an autopsy brain, and what you can see, which both Michael and Phyllis referred to, by brain imaging using PET imaging agents, where you can look at amyloid and you can look at tau. And to connect those two pieces of information that were so distant for so many years was facilitated by longitudinal studies, that is, natural history studies, where people had collected patient samples over long years. This is efforts like ADNI, like the studies were being conducted at Rush University with the religious order studies, studies like Oscar Hansen in Sweden with the Biofinder study. We now understand the real human disease, not simply by looking at end-stage postmortems, but looking at people in life. And that really helped the FDA formulate the guidelines where we can define Alzheimer's not by obscure clinical terms, but precise biomarker definitions. So we have a 6-point scale going from 1, where a person doesn't have any symptoms, no symptoms whatsoever, but they have the beginning of pathology in their brain, all the way to the end of the scale where you have a person who has fulminant pathology and has, unfortunately, the ravages of dementia evident in their brain. So I think that, to get at two questions here, go back to the kind of person be alive and well with amyloid in their brain and symptom-free? Absolutely, yes. Can a person have dementia and not have amyloid and have Alzheimer's disease? Absolutely no. So it is a requirement for the definition of the disease.
So it's interesting to see that research is really looking to the asymptomatic population for answers, something that we wouldn't have done maybe a decade ago. So tell us, Brian, what are some of the considerations in terms of patients and data that are really imperative to kind of pushing research and that pipeline down to more drug development?
Sure, Deborah. So first, I think you've got, with Phyllis, Dominic, and Michael, you've got incredible scientific domain expertise here. But where I play is really in understanding how to use data to basically help get drugs to patients in a better way. And this is really complicated, and I think our thinking about this has evolved immensely over the last few years. And Dominic touched on this. I mean, the fact that we now longitudinally look at the natural history of disease and can better define that and understand that has really opened even the FDA and the regulators thinking about the fact that real world data is just critically important to this. If I think about it, you've got a set of data that you're going to need to get a drug approved by regulators, and the pharma companies know exactly kind of these endpoints and the like. But once the drug's been approved by the regulators, it still has to be bought by the patients or the payers, and that's another set of real world data and real world outcomes that are going to have to be demonstrated. Now, the way that I really look at this is that we need to begin to collect more systemically the right data set to meet all of those end goals. And I actually think that some of the work Us Against Alzheimer's is doing to really determine what are the outcomes that matter most to all of the different stakeholders, because you need alignment between what's important to the patient, the caregivers, the physicians, and society in general in terms of what we can afford that need to be aligned. Now, the great news is that I think because of the maturation of technology, we now have tools we just did not have several years ago. We have long longitudinal databases of many different types that we can use to study these important questions and answer them much more quickly. As hard as COVID has been on the world, the one thing I would mention is that COVID has actually accelerated the way that we think about virtual trials and reaching out and the use of other wearables and devices to collect data. So really interesting time to be.
So actually, can we ask you more specifically, what is the data now that is being considered that wasn't maybe 5 years ago? What are we getting? I mean, we're seeing technology zoom ahead. And we're getting a lot of readings if anyone wears a Whoop or Apple Watch. And honestly, I don't think a lot of people really understand some of the biomarkers. But from the scientific side, what data are you getting that is important for drug discovery that we didn't get before or we didn't know about?
So I think we're still early there, and I'd love my colleagues to give their perspectives too. But I think we're still early in the use of what we call, Michael and Phyllis talked about biomarkers, maybe blood-based test or imaging tests that basically say somebody has amyloid or tau or other important biomarkers. People are now beginning to talk about digital biomarkers. Are there data that comes off wearable devices that allow us to infer different information about how that patient is done? I used to be a practicing neurologist before I got really into the data business, and I would see my patients with dementia a couple times a year. If we put a wearable on a person, we have hundreds of thousands of data points that we never had before. Now, what we have to do is we have to do the studies, and they will take a little bit of time, and they've already begun, but we have to be able to clinically validate these different digital biomarkers and say, okay, when I see this digital biomarker, it means this. And I think we're just really beginning that journey right now, and I think that's the opportunity of the next few years.
Okay, and another question has come in that asking, are there unintended consequences of removing amyloid? But I'd like to make that question a little bit bigger since we have such distinguished panelists. As a drug company, how do you decide what the right target is? What types of information validates, developing a drug? I mean, obviously, amyloid is the most popular choice for drug development, but what is going on behind the scenes that validates that? I'm throwing it to all of you.
Let me start,
Yeah, go ahead.
and then I'm going to let Mike do this one. We'll see if he still agrees with me, because sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Usually we do. But Deb, I think I want to build on, for that question, on the comment you made about the analysis that Being Patient did, looking at all the different mechanisms. When you think about, that are being studied right now, amyloid, tau, et cetera, when you think about drug development in general, what we have to do is we have to have a really good understanding of the disease state and the disease pathology. Then we find what's called a druggable target. So you identify that target and you say, I can actually interact with that part of the disease cascade in some way with a drug. In this case, obviously, we're talking about monoclonal antibodies as the first ones out of the gate. There was a time where we were fighting between amyloid versus tau. In fact, I think at one point it was called the Baptists versus the Taoists, because it was beta amyloid, which was very clever. But what we have found as we've understood these things is these are actually part of the same type of disease cascade, with amyloid coming first, tau coming later, and then the neural inflammation and some of the other things that are downstream from that. The same thing happens in drug discovery and development. If you find amyloid first, you find that it's a druggable target first. You're going to see those treatments come through the pipeline first. But then you see, oh, now tau, it's a new target, and we found a way to make it druggable, and we're starting to see it come through. So I think you'll see it, kind of come in waves as that innovation cycle moves. And I think that's really exciting, because what we're going to know about Alzheimer's disease is it's not going to be a one hit. You're not going to have one silver bullet or one mechanism that actually can cure this disease. So moving our way through that disease target, I think, is important. At Lilly, the way we make that decision is to see if, when targeting the pathology, do you actually move the clinical endpoint that you're looking to move? In our case, that's cognition. And right now, the only place where we really have that connection, and this is what the accelerated approval was all about, is between amyloid and cognition. So now what we're trying to say is, can you make those connections on these other targets? Mike, how much did I butcher that? Would you edit?
I would agree with that. I expand it conceptually in terms of drug development being seen as what's sometimes, depending on the company and the development process, the 4 R's. So the right hypothesis, the right population, the right dose, and the right endpoint. All leading to pathophysiology guided drug development. So early on, each of those elements need to be considered for each particular target, and evidence generated to support that. And the more evidence that's generated to support each of those features, the higher the probability of progressing through development. And then Dominic may be able to talk more about the translation side and the early clinical side for targets.
Yeah, well, so I agree completely with what both Phyllis and Michael have said. So I like the 4 R's in particular, Michael. I think that's a very nice way to kind of keep everything in place with the hypothesis, the population, the dose, and the endpoints. One thing I would add in is, unfortunately, because Alzheimer's disease is such a common disorder, it actually means genetic analysis is very powerful. Because we have very large numbers of individuals, we can actually look across the population base and pick out small genetic factors. And I think that we're getting to a stage where we're actually understanding that, non-familial forms of Alzheimer's disease, so-called sporadic Alzheimer's disease, is actually impacted by multiple different genetic factors. And that gives us a great place to start for what Phyllis referred to as the next wave after A-beta and the next wave after tau. Then we have a whole slew of other targets, the most notable of which is ApoE, but there's certainly a lot of others, and there's a lot of those factors that actually interact with each other. And so I think that we can really start to think, I've been working on Alzheimer's disease since 1991. And when I started, people said, the best you can do is stop Alzheimer's disease. You'll never actually ever be able to treat it. I think that we're getting within sight that we can start talking about really treating people who have symptoms.
Okay, I want to unpack the genetic question. We actually got a question from someone in our audience asking, what is the state of genetic research? Now, just to give our audience a bit of background, ApoE4 is the what's known as the Alzheimer's gene, but then we also have discovered early onset markers. There's a few genes that we know if you have that marker, then you're going to have early onset Alzheimer's, APP, PRSN1 and 2. But we cover on Being Patient all the time new genetic markers that are being discovered. My question is, when we discover a gene makes someone perhaps more predisposed to Alzheimer's, what does that mean in terms of research? Does that mean we're headed to do genetic reengineering, of certain genetics in order to prevent the disease? What does that look like in drug development and research down the pipeline?
Maybe I'll just jump in because I brought up genetics to start off with. I think that we want to be very clear about the different roles that genetics play. There's the so-called autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease, and that's individuals who will develop Alzheimer's disease because they have causative mutations. Those mutations destine those people to develop disease, right? But they're a very small, they're an important but very small percentage of the total number of people with Alzheimer's disease. So there aren't truly, inheritable forms of Alzheimer's disease beyond people who have mutations in APP, which is the precursor protein from which the amyloid beta protein that forms the amyloid in the brain is derived, and presenilin, which is a protein who constitutes one of the enzymes that releases A beta from APP. So if you have mutations in either of those two genes, unfortunately, you're by and large doomed to develop Alzheimer's disease. But the other genetic components don't doom you to develop Alzheimer's disease. They increase your risk. Even people who are ApoE4 positive, who have two alleles of ApoE4, we all have 2 copies of each gene. And if you have 2 copies of E4, you're at very increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. But even amongst that population, there are some people who do not develop Alzheimer's disease. So that implies that there are other genetic modifiers that can actually turn down the effects of some of these risks. And so understanding the balance between these different genetic modifiers actually holds great promise for the future for people who are even at high risk of developing Alzheimer's disease.
So Deb, just to jump in on that, because I think this genetic question is really, really important. Being able to separate out the two things that Dominic was just talking about, those kind of genetic predispositions, familial, the dominantly inherited Alzheimer's disease versus these risk factors. Because, you also asked a question earlier about if I have amyloid in my brain, does that mean I'm definitely going to get Alzheimer's? Well, these are risk factors. And I think for those of us that have the opportunity to engage externally, it's really important to talk about the things that you can do to potentially modify that risk. Now, as researchers, we want to figure out how to generate that evidence-based data, whether that be through the Alzheimer's Association running the finger study and some of the lifestyle modifications they're measuring, or those of us that might be looking at, say, therapeutic interventions. But I think that's a really important thing because we don't know everything yet about why someone does or doesn't, if they get amyloid, or they do or they don't, if they have these ApoE4 homozygote or heterozygote position. And, while you can never blueberry your way out of Alzheimer's disease, there are things that we can do for our health to help our brains, help our bodies be more resilient. And I think that's a really important thing when we talk in the community.
And if I could add, building also on how genetics are used to support drug development. These genetic risk factors, even though they may increase the risk a very small amount, do support that pathway as a potential pathway for drug development. And in addition to genes that affect the risk of developing disease, genetic studies are now looking at how genes may affect the phenotypic presentation of Alzheimer's disease, how it might affect biomarker levels or biomarker progressions in Alzheimer's disease. So again, helping us understand the various pathways. And even all of these genetic risks can even be pulled together into what's called a polygenic risk score that can also help assess risk or timing or onset of Alzheimer's disease, or help select patients for clinical trials. So it's a very active area, and genetic support for a target is one of the strongest validation supports for going after that target for therapeutics.
Thank you. Thank you for that, both to all of you. And I guarantee you're going to like this next question, which is, a good segue from what Michael was just saying. Someone has asked, said, my father and both his sisters died of Alzheimer's. I don't have symptoms, but should I get into a trial anyway? So that opens the door to talk about clinical trial participation, how important it is. Diversity included, but let's talk a little bit about people like myself. I too have a mom with Alzheimer's disease. She was diagnosed quite late. Am I a viable candidate now that you all are turning towards the asymptomatic population? Are people like us who have parents with Alzheimer's disease, but so far, knock on wood, don't have any cognitive issues, although my family might tell you differently. But are we candidates? Are we for upcoming research? And how would we be able to contribute to understanding and developing the pipeline?
I think I speak for all of us when I start by saying that clinical trial participants are our heroes. We could not do the work that we do without clinical trial participation. And in fact, when you look at what's the thing that's slowing us down the most these days, it's actually recruiting participants. The science is moving much, much, much faster than the trial operations. And I know you know that, Deb, because of the questions that you get from the Being Patient group. I can say from our experience on A4, which was the first asymptomatic study that was done in preclinical Alzheimer's disease, still going on, Lilly in partnership with the NIH and several other partners. What we found is the folks that are most motivated to participate are actually those that have a family or friend who's been impacted. So they might be looking at it for themselves, they might be looking at it for their children, or they might be doing it to honor that loved one and just say, I want to be part of the solution. I want to be part of the battle. And because now we've learned so much about this disease, there's actually an opportunity to be part of the solution when you are cognitively unimpaired. There are some of those biomarker tests that you will go through to see whether you would qualify for the study or not, because we would want to make sure that you had that underlying pathology. You still don't want to run a study for 10, 15, 20 years. So you've got to be able to catch people at the right phase of the disease. But there's absolutely the opportunity over a certain age for people to raise their hand and say, I want to be part of the solution. That can be in a drug study, but it can also be in some of these other studies, observational studies, like Brian mentioned, biomarker studies, digital biomarker studies, lifestyle modifications. There's so much opportunity right now to raise your hand and be part of the solution. And word of mouth is often the way participants get referred to a clinical trial.
I just want to add this question that came in because I think it's what people are wondering. So someone has asked, say you're an average 40-year-old, how do you find out if you have one of these biomarkers in order to participate? I mean, I'm assuming it's not left up to the individual to go to the doctor and say, can you check if I have plaque in my brain? So what's your suggestion to the people who don't have symptoms, but maybe a family member? What do they need to know in order to understand whether or not they qualify for a clinical trial?
One of the things we kicked off early on was talking about the tremendous advances that have been made in biomarkers and just the better understanding of the disease. So as well as all of the work that goes on with pharma companies running clinical trials, there's a lot of folks in academia and in clinical centers who are running longitudinal natural history studies. If you don't qualify for a clinical trial, you may consider becoming a part of a natural history study. For instance, there are some natural history studies that are trying to recruit people who are ApoE4, who are completely negative, so that they can follow them over time. And that's a tremendous way both of protecting yourself and giving to the community, because you're giving to our understanding of the disease, while at the same time, if you do transition into that early stage of being amyloid positive, you'll be first to know about it. So I think that that's one thing that we can really, encourage everyone to do. Is there's a lot of very active work out there with natural history studies. I'd encourage people to get involved in those.
So to be super direct, ct.gov has a listing of studies. It's not incredibly easy to use. So the Alzheimer's Association has their trial match. So you can go and actually put in your characteristics and they'll see if there's a match, as does the Banner Alzheimer's Prevention Registry. Typically, if you're below the age of 50 or 55, you're probably not going to find a therapeutic intervention study. As Dominic mentioned, you're more likely to find one of the observational studies, the natural history study, the behavior or lifestyle intervention. I know that Lilly has a website called Lilly Memory Trials. So you can log on and find a site near you. It's kind of like find a Starbucks near me. You just type in your zip code. It'll show you what's recruiting near you. And I'm sure that ASI and Biogen have very similar tools. But if you don't want to go company by company, there are some other ways to do that. Very, very simple, very direct, very easy. And try it, see if it works, and then spread the word with your friends.
Okay, and I do want to touch on the diversity issue, because it's a big one, and everywhere I turn, there's people wanting to get more diverse populations into study. So, Michael, just tell us quickly, what is it that what would that add to research, having higher representation of Latinos, Blacks in clinical research?
I think it's critically important to understand that the drugs work similarly across diverse populations. It's also very important for us to improve the access to clinical trials. And I think we've learned from COVID that we can do many clinical trial activities virtually or remotely. So home infusions of treatments, remote cognitive assessments, remote safety assessments, and building those capabilities so that we can bring the clinical trials to patients where they are, as well as reducing the burden of clinical trials on patients. So right now, for several of our pivotal trials, the cognitive assessments and visits can be pretty long, and that also limits the access to clinical trials for individuals. So I think the COVID pandemic has accelerated some of these decentralized activities, and then a range of initiatives that involve the community in terms of building trust in communities, bringing clinical trial sites to more diverse communities. So it's a range of activities I think need to be taken in parallel, with input from the stakeholders, so input from potential participants.
Brian, I don't know if you can answer this, but is there any data around what the biggest barriers are? Because I've heard people say of Alzheimer's disease, 85% don't get filled to capacity. Do we have any data around that? Anything that you would offer insight on?
I think it would be hard for me to put a specific number, because it's going to be very context specific around a specific study. I think Michael just talked, I think, beautifully about the importance of diversity, and I think to the industry's credit, the first thing you have to do is recognize that diversity is important. And I can tell you, almost every trial that we run has basically targets for different population ethnicities and populations, and we, they have to be filled. And so that actually has driven us to really try to figure out, how do we find those patients? How do we engage in those patients? How do we work with those local communities to get those people in? I also agree entirely with what Michael said, is we have to make it easier for people to participate on trials. And the more we can do remotely, the less time you have to go to a clinic or a site for a long assessment. I mean, that's very difficult for people that are working 2 jobs and have a family. So I think we're making a lot of progress there, but there's still more work to be done.
Great.
There
Okay.
is
And
a
we have
white paper that was put out by the University of Southern California, a collaborative event where they actually worked, Brian, with IQVIA and did a really nice funnel that identified what all the barriers were and bottlenecks to clinical trial recruiting. And then they are in the process right now of doing a solution set, and every one of those solutions is they're looking also at diversity. And that becomes really important, because when you think about the fact that African Americans are twice as likely to be impacted by Alzheimer's disease, and the Latinx population 1.5 times as likely, it's of critical importance that we actually have a represented population in these studies. So if you can anyone can go find that white paper now on the USC website. It's called the Bottlenecks in Alzheimer's Clinical Trials. And has also been published, I think, with Paul Eason as the lead author, and Dana Goldman. And then I'm really looking forward to that next piece of that work, which is going to talk about some of the solutions. Hopefully we'll have some of them already in play, but I think that'll be really helpful too.
Great.
Deborah, I was just going to say, we're getting much better at doing diversity. All of the big COVID vaccine trials had very strict requirements around certain populations, and those all, it took a lot of work, but they all recruited, their targets in incredibly small, short periods of time. So we're getting there.
Okay, and we're almost out of time, but I just really want to kind of wrap it up with looking forward, looking at the pipeline to progress. Now, I think a lot of science has come to agree that Alzheimer's is not just treating one thing, it's treating kind of, and especially with prevention, it's looking at a whole host of either risks or symptoms. I just want to get each of your takes on what is imperative to solving the puzzle in throwing forward in the next 5 years. How do we look at this disease, and how do we really break down some of the barriers to finding how to successfully treat it? Why don't I just start with you, Dominic? I'm going to just do a round robin quickly. Go for it.
Well, you can always accuse me of being over-optimistic, because that's the way I like to be. And I actually think that in terms of treating earlier, that we're in a pretty good spot. I wouldn't be surprised that we can have a tremendous benefit to a lot of people simply by targeting A-beta if we go early enough. I think as we progress into the disease, that's where we need to really play upon, multiple different pathways. But I'm kind of like the glass half full sort of guy. And I think our glass is already half full, in that we know that we're starting to see a class effect with targeting A-beta. And I think that if we go earlier, that we'll see even more success.
Great, thanks. Michael?
I think we're seeing a lot of evidence that Alzheimer's as a neurodegenerative disease may be tractable to treatment, and clinical trials reporting out over the coming years will help us understand that. I think what's critical for us to then have an impact is to improve the detection and diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, whether through biomarkers or digital diagnostics, identifying individuals early in the disease course, or even in the prevention space when they're more likely to respond to potential treatments before there's been very severe irreversible neurodegeneration.
Great, thank you, Michael. And Phyllis, very quickly, I think we're down to a minute.
Just a double exclamation point behind what Michael just said. 30 years ago, we were in a situation where people wouldn't say the C word. And now you can't imagine getting a cancer diagnosis and your doctor not telling you. And yet today, only 30% of people are told when there's an Alzheimer's diagnosis. And that's because the doctors aren't bad doctors, but they're not confident. And now we've got these wonderful tools. I would love 10 years from now for everybody to know a cognitive assessment of their brain health, just like they know their blood pressure and their blood glucose. And for us to be able to say, look, we can actually measure that you've reduced your amyloid pathology the same way we can reduce a tumor. I actually don't think that's 10 years from now. I think that could be next year. We just need to move a little faster in the healthcare systems.
I love that optimistic note. Brian, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I think that in 10 years' time, I think we are going to have the digital infrastructure to be able to recruit people virtually to really assess their longitudinal health better. And when we have that, we're going to be able to run trials with much smaller numbers of people that are going to show effect much faster. And that's going to be to everyone's benefit. So I share Dominic's optimism. Absolutely.
Okay, and thank you so much. As a daughter of a mom with Alzheimer's, I want to say thank you all for the research and all of the hard work that you're doing. It means a lot to all of us out there. Dominic, Michael, Phyllis, Brian, thank you so much. I found this incredibly helpful and as a check-in, and we look forward to talking to you perhaps next year to see what 2022 brings. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay with us. Up next at 2:30, our Brain Health Bootcamp Town Hall.
Are you worried about your memory and brain health? Do you have concerns about a loved one? Us Against Alzheimer's can help. Brain Guide is a free platform that provides you with knowledge and resources to take the best next steps in managing your own or a loved one's brain health. Brain Guide includes confidential memory questionnaires that can be taken over the phone or online in English or Spanish. If you have memory concerns for yourself or are noticing changes to your thinking or memory, you can take a self-administered questionnaire. If you have concerns about a loved one's memory, you can take a questionnaire for someone in your life that you see often. When you are done, we send you tailored resources based on the answers you gave us, and you have the option to print a summary for your doctor. Brain Guide is not intended to diagnose or make treatment recommendations regarding Alzheimer's or any other disease. First steps can be tough, but just one small step now can help you take every step that follows with confidence. Visit mybrainguide.org or call 855-BRAIN-411 to learn more.
My name is Loretta Vini, and I am a care partner for my mom, Doris, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2006. To take care of my brain health, I do a variety of things pretty much every single day. First, I do a lot with Lego bricks. I build models to reduce the stress. And I also work with seniors and those with dementia to engage with them as well. I also work out every day. I have a gym in my home, so I'm able to do a variety of different exercises. And lastly, I use some apps on my phone to do a variety of brain games like Elevate, and that helps me as well. So those are the things I do every day. I think there are a lot of things that can get in the way of taking care of your brain health, especially those who work and caregive at the same time. That can be very, very difficult. It can be a challenging work day or a challenging caregiving day, and you just don't feel like it. Sometimes you are very stressed out or you're exhausted. You just want to plop down in a chair. But I think if we have an accountability partner who can say, hey, did you work out today? Or did you do your Lego models? Or what did you do? No, I didn't get to it. And then have somebody to remind us to do that. So we are accountable to each other and just don't forget. And you feel so much better after you do it as well.
Good afternoon. I am so excited to be here. My name is Dr. Sandy Bond Chapman, and I am the Chief Director of the Center for Brain Health and a professor at the University of Texas at Dallas. We're going to have such a fun time with this panel, but I want to start as we think about what is brain health. I want to define for you how we define it, just as a way to start. Because right now, there really hasn't been a good definition. For us, brain health is more than preventing Alzheimer's disease. Brain health is a higher category of health. If you improve your brain health, then it helps your mental health, it can push off Alzheimer's, and it makes overall your life better. When we think about brain health, think about this definition. Using your brain's capacities to thrive in your life context, whatever your starting point. And we know that there's multiple ways that you can get there. So brain health is a higher category of health than just preventing Alzheimer's, and it's more than mental health. It's everything that drives who you are, who you think, how you think, and what you do. And it's being able to thrive in your context, whatever your starting point. So let me get started today. I want to introduce this amazing panel that Us Against Alzheimer's put together, and I'm really proud to be able to moderate it. First of all, let me introduce Andres Martin. He's a retired Marine living with the Alzheimer's gene. His family has been affected by the Jalisco mutation for early Alzheimer's for many generations. Andres and his wife, Amanda, are parents to an amazing 4-year-old daughter, Alex Jade Martin. Mr. Martin's new mission in life is to fight against Alzheimer's disease to protect his daughter and all future generations. Now, Dr. Magali Haas. She is founder, CEO, and president of the Cohen's Veterans Bioscience, a nonprofit brain research organization based in New York, whose mission is to fast track diagnostics and therapeutics to advance precision brain health. Dr. Haas has over 15 years of pharmaceutical experience, predominantly at Johnson & Johnson, where she assumed broad end-to-end development leadership roles in early and late-stage neuroscience, clinical development, translational medicine, diagnostics, and integrative solutions. Welcome, Dr. Haas. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Aisha Shirzai. She is a neurologist and co-director of the Alzheimer's Prevention Program at Loma Linda University, where she leads the lifestyle program for the prevention of Neurological Diseases. She completed dual training in preventive medicine and neurology at Loma Linda University, and she has a fellowship in vascular neurology and epidemiology at Columbia University. She's also a trained plant-based culinary artist. Her husband, Dr. Dean Sherzai, is co-director with her of the Alzheimer's prevention program at Loma Linda. Dean trained in neurology at the esteemed Georgetown University School of Medicine and completed fellowships in neurodegenerative diseases and dementia at the National Institutes of Health and UC San Diego. He also holds a PhD in healthcare leadership with a focus on community health from Andrews University. Together, Team Sherzai are dedicated to helping our communities where they are with brain health information. So welcome to every one of our participants that are with us today. And I want to share with you a survey, a new survey that Us Against Alzheimer's did, the A-List, because they're so interested in learning from you and how we can make a difference. It was conducted in partnership with us here at the Center for Brain Health and Dr. Fayron Epps from the assistant professor at Emory Nursing School. What's interesting about these 1,400 respondents is that they knew that taking care of their brain health is very important, almost all of them. 81% said, you know, we're doing things in our day-to-day life to take care of our brain health. But think about this. Only 23% felt that they knew what to do to maintain their health, or they rarely got information from their doctors. So this survey shines a bright light on the challenges we face as we think about what is brain health and how can we have access to culturally appropriate brain health information so that all of us can thrive in our own context. So let me start with some questions. And I want you, as you're thinking of questions yourself, please type them in the chat and we will get to those. So I'm going to start with Dr. Sherzai, Team Sherzai. So both of you, I'd like for you to tell us from your perspective, how do you define brain health? And then more specifically, I want you to give us some very specific steps that our participants can go, I'm going to do that when this call is over. So please share with us your definition.
First of all, thank you so much for having us. This is such an important concept to speak about because this is the century of the brain. We are our brain. I mean, to think about it, I have my own props. I walk around with this brain. And this is a 3-pound organ, 2% of body's weight, consumes 25% of body's energy. If you transplant the heart, you're still that person. You transplant the liver, you're still that person. You transplant the brain, you are the new brain. This brain is who we are. This brain is where we exist. Everything is around this brain. And it's not just about avoiding diseases. It's about the fact that we haven't even tapped into the full potential of this brain. We haven't tapped into the fact that we can thrive way more than we thought, because up to this point in human history, we've been surviving. But what we talk about is thriving with this incredible brain, which has 87 billion neurons, 1 quadrillion potential connections, and by some estimate, 1 times 10 to the 50th processing power. Incredible capacity that we don't tap into because we're just surviving from moment to moment. And the answer has been a pill, a vitamin, or a superfood. And that's not the answer. The answer is a comprehensive approach that people can have freely in their homes. Just awareness. And this has been our life's work for the last 20 years, which is simple measures that people can institute that can have profound effect, whether it's nutrition. We self-servingly, we've coined the concept of neuro, N-E-U-R-O, nutrition, exercise, unwind, or stress management. Ours, restorative sleep, and optimize mental activity. These are not nominal factors. Studies have shown just adapting your diet can reduce your risk by 50% or more. Exercising, truly exercising, not walk in the neighborhood or gardening, those are meditation, but truly exercising can reduce your risk by as much as 40% or more. These are simple, cheap things that people can bring into their life, yet that can not just avoid diseases such as Alzheimer's or other dementias, but to truly build focus and attention and memory and executive function well into our 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. And that's an incredible power. That's where we are in the 21st century. And that can be had in people's homes.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. I mean, I think one of the things with this invisible black box, people haven't known, am I exercising enough? How am I changing it? So later I want to get, and I don't know if Dr. Haas, if you would like to say, how are we going to be able to make this invisible black box visible so that we can start to say, hey, look what you've done in these 3 months? Because as you pointed out, our brain changes dramatically by everything we do. And yet people aren't doing the things that can build capacity from ages 7 to 70. So, I'm really interested as we think about that for the audience, how we can motivate people to do these things that you just talked about. Andres, I would love, you have a motto. Can you share that with us, how you take care of your brain health and what you're dealing with the Alzheimer's gene?
Of course, thank you. It's living with Alzheimer's, and the word living has a big emphasis on it. So I have a genetic mutation that was inherited from my father that would lead me to Alzheimer's symptoms in about 10 years or so. I have every reason to be depressed, to feel like my life is over, but I just have too much to lose. So my main emphasis is to live with Alzheimer's. That helps me, my family, my daughter, and just educating myself on the principles of Alzheimer's and knowing enough to stay healthy is what keeps me sane. Alzheimer's is complicated. I can dive pretty deep into it and later on in my life. I don't want to do that. I know enough to stay sane and to live with Alzheimer's. So that's the biggest emphasis for me, is just know enough and knowing who to reach out to if they have any questions.
Well, I love what you said about living with Alzheimer's, because while we know that it's more than just preventing Alzheimer's, but when you do think that you're going to have it, how can you thrive in your context with the capacities that you have, that we see people at all levels still be able to thrive and find ways. So I really appreciate those insights. And how do you get through the stigma? I know that the Shirazais and Dr. Haas, there's so much stigma still with our brain. In fact, as we've worked with military, they often say, and you're a Marine, I'll do anything to be physically fit, but from the neck up, it's the no-fly zone, because we have stigma about our brain. How have you been able to really overcome the stigma that so many people have, knowing what you do?
So brain health, it does have a negative stigma. People think you're crazy, you're seeing a psychologist or you're doing something. But I think Alzheimer's did that for me, because at that point, it's either just listen to the stigma, or just live life. I have a beautiful daughter, beautiful wife. I have a life to live for. So the stigma becomes irrelevant to me. And part of it is, like I said, education. So now this panel by itself makes me feel more comfortable too, because I have more resources, to reach out to now. So it's just about knowing people, understanding what it is, and just live your life, live with Alzheimer's or live without it.
Brilliant. Yeah, I know. I agree. I think we all want to go see the Shirazais and see what they can do to help grow what they're talking about. Dr. Haas, your research focused on military, the veterans. How does the evidence that we can maintain brain health affect this community and your work? Because we know that much of our medicine starts first in the military, because, they think from the get-go of prevention. But how do you see your work affecting brain health in this community? And then how do you think they could begin to put the neck up into the get physically fit from the get-go instead of, oh, let's wait till something happens after what we say, ride a boom after something bad happens. How can we put brain health and let the military help us lead there?
Great question. So I think we know that our military veterans are generally joining the military as young people, and when they begin their service, they usually come in physically healthy. But what we're learning from the research in this population is that stress and trauma are major contributors to brain health, and that chronic stress can lead to changes in brain function. So it's really important that we study this population because we can see that these changes can be reversed through active interventions like the Sherzais are telling us about, the cognitive therapy, the stress reduction, the exercise, the diet, sleep therapy. These can all individually and preferably in combination be highly effective interventions. And we're seeing that they do work even in military populations. We also know that genetics plays a role in risk, but that these interventions can have a greater role in have a greater effect size than the genetics by themselves plays. So even genetic risk can be mitigated. I think the question that you asked earlier about what can we do to destigmatize or even to monitor our brain health, I think all of us know when we're feeling well in a given day, but one of the things we're looking to achieve is to build a brain health index, a way that we can objectively measure how someone is doing at any given time. And then hopefully that information will help us all understand where we are relative to our own path, our own journey.
Thank you. We need to work on that because we've just developed one that we've been testing. We almost have 7,000 people now, ages 10 to 100, with a brain health index to see when people, what is it that helps them to thrive in their context and what different factors, if it's clarity, their possibility thinking, their sleep, their compassion versus their social resilience versus their fortitude, the ability to stay stable. So I think there's ways that all of us on this panel can work together to make sure that things are accessible with people in all these communities. And I think we all see the need because people want to know, hey, where am I with all this digital and technology? So the bad part of COVID, while it's been horrible to make us isolated, it's also made us open to telehealth and ways that we can begin to monitor and remove the stigma. So thank you for that, Dr. Haas, in the military, the work you're doing with PTSD, and so many will be coming back now, and we want them to realize too that there's things you can do and not just accept diagnoses, but to make your brain stronger and healthier, and getting that message out really helps. Dr. Sherzai, I guess Aisha, I want to have you address this. How can people feel confident raising this issue with their doctor? Because so many doctors, I know when we have people come to us at the Center for Brain Health, they'll say, I asked my doctor, he said, oh, you're just the worried well, just go on and do things. How can they begin to feel comfortable? And what type of doctor should people begin to think about? And how do we you all have thought about preventive medicine? How fast can we get the information out so doctors can be involved with that? So that's a lot of questions, but, I'm really curious for you is how you feel like the participants listening to this, what questions should they ask of their doctors, and should they wait till they're worried?
I love that question because I think that's at the core of empowerment. There was a time when it was essentially strange to talk about brain health because it was assumed that every time you meet a doctor or a healthcare provider, it should be for a disease. But things have changed now, and we have a lot of information thanks to some really interesting research from all over the world that, brain health is a continuum and that we should start taking care of it as early as possible, and that it's not a wrong thing to bring it up with a physician. And it could be a family physician, a general practitioner, it could be a neurologist, a psychiatrist, a family medicine, anyone. Most doctors are very well equipped and they're knowledgeable about the risk factors for brain diseases. There was a time when they thought that there's not much one can do about it, but we now know that the brain, just like the heart, just like the kidneys or any other organ in our body, has blood vessels. It's affected by what we do every single day. And understanding what people's risk factors are as early as possible actually gives them a vector. It gives them a path to take care of this amazing organ. So things like, knowing whether someone has blood pressure, knowing whether someone has high cholesterol, knowing whether someone has, cardiovascular disease. These are things that are preventable and they can be treated. And the sooner the better. We now know that midlife is a very crucial time for people to take care of these risk factors because it can determine brain health later on. So, the brain being such a taxed organ, if we address these risk factors early on, it will definitely benefit from the resiliency tools more than any other organ.
Yeah, it's really, I loved when you said that this organ is so dynamic, but it has so many backup systems. Dean, as you started off saying, why do we lose so much capacity starting in our 20s when we can show that people can regain, at 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s? We don't have to wait till, a lot of people that we see will say, I don't have to start worrying until I'm 65. Well, you don't have to worry, but you have to be proactive. Yeah. And I think go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. It's how do we connect to people? I mean, and this actually addresses several of the questions that came up. Is the opportunity that doctors have. The opportunity that doctors have is the fact that people trust doctors, and that trust is often just not used in the right way. And my dissertation thesis was around this concept. Certain populations come to the doctor afraid, not knowing what to ask. And in fact, in a way, they leave disempowered because they're not told what they're not able to communicate. This is the opportunity for the physician to connect humanly. And that's a thing that doctors can do. We can connect as human beings, open up the conversation, and then that opens up the entire world of possibilities. And we haven't done that in the past. And this is the opportunity to open up this venue because, like you said, the brain's ability to expand its capacity is profound. Mm-hmm. It's difficult to communicate to 20 and 30-year-olds because they think they're immoral. But you can talk to people in their own needs. Mm-hmm. For 20 and 30-year-old is building capacity, building focus, building ability to process faster. And for others, it's about being able to be sharper. When you open up the conversation, you actually find that people find brain health for themselves, and it just takes opening up of the conversations.
Right. And I love it. Yeah, it's the upward potential that we, it's not like our brain has fixed capacity that we've been stuck thinking like that. But this panel knows that. But why did so many of the respondents to the survey say when they would ask their doctor, they got no information? So it's not as. Is it because of the training, or you're saying we should go to them, but where do they go? And there's, as you also know, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And how do individuals begin to say, do this? I mean, how much money they're spending on all sorts of things that have no evidence behind it.
Is it more of a social issue?
Go ahead.
Sorry, I said, is it more of a social? When I grew up in LA, in Southern California, at that point, economics was the thing because we were not poor, but I was not doing as well. And then there was a stigma now. Through my career, more money, except I was surrounding myself around more educated people, and it became okay to talk about mental health. Now, going back, LA in the hood, talking about mental health. So it's more of a social issue, right? Just the fact that they don't have the money maybe and the confidence or the education level to be able to feel comfortable talking about mental health. Because right now I'm okay saying I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm depressed, I'm anxious every day, but it's part of my life. But I'm okay talking about that. Mm-hmm. You go back to LA, you bring that up, maybe you won't be able to get that out of them.
Yeah, and I'm glad, and I'm going to ask Dr. Haas to speak of that. But one of the studies we did with our military, where we gave them cognitive strategies that improve their holistic brain health, They literally improved their depression by 60% and reduced their stress by 40% by giving them proactive every single day. There's things you can do to move your needle forward. Dr. Haas, based on what Andres was saying, what sort of are some things that you see to help people to know, who do I go to? That doesn't seem like there's really no place to get real information for my brain health.
Yeah, I think these are really important questions. I think we do need to create closer connections between patients, clinicians, and also the scientific community. You're asking the question, why don't the doctors know what to tell their patients? Well, because they themselves don't have those answers at hand. They need a closer relationship with scientists. So we can transfer evidence and the information to them as in real time, right? There's a delay. We learn something scientifically, we publish it, but it takes a long time for that trickle into the system as a best practice, not just for clinicians, but also for patients themselves. What can you do to treat yourself better? You don't need to rely on a doctor all the time.
Yeah.
As you just said.
I agree with that. That's it's kind of shocking that it takes 20 years typically for scientific discoveries to trickle down into practice. And Us Against Alzheimer's is impatient with that. We're not going to let that happen. They're not going to let that happen. And it's why this panel means so much. There's a question from the audience that I want to raise because I think there's so many people that have either mild cognitive impairment, early, or even moderate. Can you, if our definition of brain health is help people thrive in the context at the level that they start, from your perspective, are there things that someone can do with, let's just say, moderate Alzheimer's disease to improve their brain health? Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the question is phrased so beautifully because from their perspective is the right question to start with. Because everybody shouldn't do everything all at once. That's a number one formula for failure at every age. It's where a person is and we have to meet them there, or where a person is and where that activity has to meet them there. So if the opportunity for that person is not so much exercise or nutrition, but is mental activity, the program should be built around that, or that person should start with that component. It could be around their passion, playing a musical instrument, or learning how to dance, or taking a class that you never could before. Now doing it, I took histology and I hated it in medical school, but now I'm taking guitar lessons. Everybody else hates me playing the guitar, but I love building my brain. So it's true. Building around those capacities that's critical. Or for another person, they can't do those things, but they can exercise. And I just got done with a patient. You really have to build around those strengths, around those opportunities. And it's beautiful to meet people where they are.
And I think I love this question too, because when people get the diagnosis, all of a sudden they all shut down. It's the only disease that we see in the end stages from the time you get the diagnosis. And yet there's so much you can do and capacity you can build. And we've been able to show when people engage, and you said it, at the right level, it may not be they could do everything they were doing before, but just where they are, where they're not too stressed. But if they stop doing activity, guess what? They lose capacity, not because of the disease, but because they aren't doing brain healthy things to continue to use their brain to thrive in their own context.
Living with Alzheimer's.
Yeah, living with Alzheimer's. Thank you.
Yeah.
What topic? Because a lot of people feel like when I go to my doctor, I've got to say, I've got, because everyone has memory problems. What topics should they really be worried about, or should they go? Should they say this risk factor? Oh, I'm curious as to what topics. One of the participants wanted to know, how do we raise the topic? What should we say besides just memory?
I can answer that. I think one of the best ways to introduce the topic is to bring up the concept that our brain is a living universe. I mean, not as flowery as that, but it's an organ that can be affected by everything we do. And the person can speak with a healthcare provider saying, I'm concerned about my brain health, and I want to make sure that I'm doing everything and anything I can to live a brain healthy life, which essentially means I want to be sharp, I want to be focused, I want to be attentive, I don't want to be forgetful or anxious or stressed out. And I want to make sure that when I get to my, say, for example, 70s, 80s, 90s, or beyond, I want to retain my memories. I want to live an unforgettable life. That's what Dean and I always say. So how can you help me live an unforgettable life? What are the things that I need to do?
I mean, Andre, you have a daughter. We have 2 kids, 2 teenagers. The question can be just as human questions like that. Like, I want to be there when my daughter grows up. I want to be there when my 2 teenage kids, go to the next level with, with their school and everything else. And I'm afraid that, that as I grow older, I might not be there completely. And that conversation is where it starts. It really is at the human level.
You brought up Alexis. We worry about her brain health now. She has a chance of having the gene that I have, but just in general, she's going to be bilingual. She likes sports. She's going to be playing sports. So it should be that simple. Like, I want to have a healthy brain. What do? It doesn't have to do with Alzheimer's, but just in general, my wife, my daughter, my mom, Alexis, we do activities that allow her brain to grow and be successful. So it's really, if I can take it to the level where Alexis, a 4-year-old, it shouldn't be a stigma, right? It's still, we're still talking about a stigma. It should be normal to want to have a healthy brain, whether you have Alzheimer's or don't have Alzheimer's.
Yeah, we think about it physically fit. I said, well, why can't we treat our brain more than we do our teeth? And we think very young about taking care of our teeth. Let's think about our brain with things to do. I'm curious. Yes.
Well, I just wanted to add that we've been talking a lot about things we can do to make our brain healthier by direct effort, but we have to remember that it's all part of a big system, the entire body, and the cardiovascular system, our glucose, stress, all of these things all go together. So you can talk to your doctor about a holistic approach as well.
To talk to them about what risk factors do I have, I want to. So when you're saying, what do you talk to your doctor about? Say, I want these risk factors controlled that are going to take away my brain capacity. And for them to know, because most doctors do know those factors. You're absolutely right. That's really something they can take with them. One of the things that I've noticed, and I want to have you all respond to this, in the past, it's getting better, but when people do activities with someone once they've got Alzheimer's disease, a lot of times they're not, Dean, what you said, do something you're passionate about, but they're things that person would never do if they didn't have Alzheimer's disease. So why do you think they want to do them now? That almost takes away their human integrity. Yeah. So I want to say, as you're thinking about helping people maintain their brain health, how do caregivers, for example, make sure that they hold living with whatever they are with dignity, with the disease? What would you say?
And I think part of that is the fact that the marketing campaigns have taken over. We did a meta-analysis that showed that we know that it's not some game on the computer per se, or Sudoku, which I absolutely abhor. It's a personal thing. Nothing wrong with Sudoku. I don't want to be.
I'm with you.
Yeah, it has to do with real life activities, and that frees people to live, or just live, not live with Alzheimer's, but to live. Because if I don't have to do Sudoku, but I do something that I love, and I know that that's as effective, if not more, then it makes sense. Let's just take playing guitar. When I'm playing the guitar, I'm reading the notes. That's the language centers of the brain. I'm processing the music. That's your frontal lobe. I'm learning visually, actually processing. It's your visual cortex. You're being creative. It's your parietal and the bigger brain. It's the connections between the different parts of the brain. Your dexterous, so your motor cortex. And you're emotionally involved. Well, in my part, it's good emotions. For my wife, it's bad emotions listening to me. But it's all of the brain. That's not Sudoku. That's a brain on fire. That's a brain. So that's why it takes people to know that it's real life activities that are more effective than contrived activities. And that frees you into living your life.
You can, and that's the problem is I'm kind of on your team. I don't want to beat up Sudoku, but when I see people on airplanes, I mean, we think that it's helping our brain. So, oh gosh, I've got 15 minutes. Let me just do this because I've got to do things for my brain health. I usually tell people either, you know what, you'd be better off if you took a nap, or think of a person that you have a problem with and do an act of compassion. Because being compassionate changes the brain, just like you were saying, the guitar. We get brain health from have meaningful relationships with people, and even finding peaceful common ground with people we disagree with changes your brain, your neuropharmacy, to bring it healthier in very dramatic ways. I want to get to caregivers because a lot of people on the call are, suffering, and they're always worried about someone else's brain health, but what about their brain health? Dr. Haas, can you address some of how you take caregivers into the equation of keeping the whole team healthier?
Yeah, so we've been part of the A-list efforts surveying caregivers' stress as well. And, basically you have to take care of your own health, brain health, in order to be able to help somebody else as well. So we have to be looking at everybody around that individual who is part of that picture, and making sure that they are optimized, that they have the breaks, that they get the sleep, and that they have the alleviation of their stressors in order to optimize their own brain health. And we're seeing that data is clearly there. They are experiencing it almost as much as the individual who's affected directly.
Yeah, and that's really devastating when you think about it, that the caregiver who so needed the stress and the lack of sleep and the constant worry is really so they can't thrive in their context. So making sure that they put themselves at the center of the equation along with the individual that they're helping. I'm interested in Team Sherzai, if you and your community outreach of people, from within the community, do you see it more as a multi-generational approach versus just dealing with people that are worried they have the disease versus, the kids and the families and the parents of a generational approach to brain health, so that it's much more, it's broader than just you, it's us. As we get better, then all ships rise.
Absolutely. That is the goal. That is the motivation behind involving family members and community members in the conversation. Unlike many other conditions where, the patient and the doctor have a very specific conversation or relationship, when it comes to brain health, it literally takes a village for someone to take care of a patient with brain disease, or even approaching brain health in general. You can't live a brain healthy life if you don't involve your family members or someone that is around you. And also, I don't think one person can take care of a person with a brain disease. It has to be spread out. It has to be generation. So, and in many ways, it's not just addressing the person in need, but addressing the general understanding, the culture, and the understanding about brain health. Little children in the family, adolescents and teenagers, people in their midlife, as well as elderly people, all have to think about their brain health, because when we take care of our brain, we've taken care of the rest of the body. The theory applies to the rest of the body as well.
So Andres, I don't know how many you've been around generation that have had the gene or have Alzheimer's disease. How has the stress, are you unusual in that knowing you have the gene and your stress level? How do you manage it and help the people around you not constantly reading signs of making it worse?
I see myself when I go to medical trials, and we had meetings all over the world with Diane, and it seems like the majority of people allowed it to take over their life. So that was one of the, for some reason, something in my brain, allowed me to not let it control me. And Dr. Haas mentioned about the high stress in the military, but then I was thinking to myself, as a pilot, I had to communicate, I had to fly a helicopter, I had to shoot rockets, and I had to do a bunch of things, which allowed me to give me the capability to handle more stress than the average person. So even though it might have been sleep deprivation, but this allows me to control and I can handle more than the average person. So I'm thinking, and then the way I grew up Hispanic, I'm thinking the combination of the dad and where I grew up in LA, street smarts, maybe it just allows me to control and not be so stressed in life.
You bring up a great point that resiliency is something that can be trained in, and that is something that the military does focus on. And we see that with Navy SEALs and Rangers and others, that they are trained to be more resilient, and that actually does protect them against these different stressors. And you said, living in LA, I grew up in Spanish Harlem. It is absolutely training zone.
And part of it is the reason I stopped flying. I elected to stop flying is because I was stressed a lot. I was sleep deprived a lot. I was going from flying in the day then to the night, and I realized that was bad for my brain. But the training before that, LA and all this stuff prepared me to be able to live with Alzheimer's. So I think that's part of it. And most people may not have that training or resilience, not because they don't want to. It's just it wasn't part of their life.
But maybe that's, it can be something with you and different doctors saying, yes, it is. And so we just have a few minutes left. I want us here at the end to just make sure people have the top things we want them to take away. I'm going to give 3, and then I'd love each of you to add one thing that we want to make sure that when people drop off this call, they feel like they have a course of action. The first thing I would say is that you began to define, one takeaway is define brain health more than preventing Alzheimer's disease. Think about brain health as a higher category of health, that when it's better, you make better decisions, you have better social resilience, you have less mental health, and it can stave off Alzheimer's disease. So being able to be proactive. So define brain health as being able to thrive with the capacities you've got, whatever level you are, to thrive in your life. The second thing is figure out what you enjoy, because when we talk about resilience, Magali, as you said, we measure resilience as part of our holistic brain health index. We know that connection of people and purpose is one of the things that completely drives, and we saw it during COVID, where people were able to raise their holistic brain health index. We know that special operations, SEAL teams and Rangers, that when they are pulled away from their social connections and they no longer have that tribe and purpose, they develop PTSD very severely when they're there. So, there's multiple ways is the second thing I want people to take away. There's connectedness, know what you love, do things that you know. The third one is to talk to your doctor about your risk factors and make sure, if you knew every single day, if I tend to this risk factor, I may be keeping myself from losing my greatest asset, capacity. Why wouldn't I control my blood pressure and my cardiovascular if I eat better? So learning how to do that. So I would like for each of you to say a sentence. We've just got a few minutes left. What would you add? I'm going to start with Sherzai. Tell us one thing that you want to make sure when people leave here, boom, what would you want them to leave with?
A boom moment would be for people to understand that the choices they make as far as their nutrition is concerned makes a huge difference. Everything we eat affects our brain health, and to eat a healthy, clean diet is important. Again, nobody has to pay for vitamin concoctions or buy anything special. You can actually make very simple changes, like eating more greens every day, like maybe eating more berries every day, and that can profoundly affect your brain health.
Perfect. Magali.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Andres.
We've got 30 more seconds. So Magali.
Go ahead, Andres.
No, I was going to say, be happy. Find someone that's more important than you. So for me, it's Alexis. So there's nothing in this world that can bring me down. The second thing is for scientists. You talked about there's a bunch of data, science that goes down. Well, I have to go to a neurologist or a psychiatrist to go find that information. That's a negative stigma. Allow me to have that information before I have to go to a doctor that makes me think stigma. And the last thing, maybe like a life coach, the last thing would be reset. I reset my mind every morning. I don't care what happened yesterday, fights or arguments. So just reset every day. It's a new day, and be healthy.
That was brilliant. That was so great. Magali, close us off.
I just wanted to add, I'd love it if everybody got involved in the scientific enterprise, answer the surveys in the A-list, help us understand more, and then we can do better as we look into the future.
Yes. Thank you all, this panel. Thank you, Us Against Alzheimer's. Thank you, Jenny Becker. Thank you, Brooks Kinney, George Vradenburg. I hope each of you have taken something away and that we all get to know each other even closer and make a difference faster. Thank you.
Thank you.
Join us at 3:30 for a fireside chat with civil rights leader Dolores Huerta on fighting for economic justice for caregivers.
I am fighting for all the caregivers across the nation who are working tirelessly around the clock to take care of their loved ones while also balancing their health.
I'm fighting for people like myself who are living with Alzheimer's or a related dementia.
I am fighting for all, so no one else must live this dreadful disease.
If there was no Alzheimer's, there would be millions of people who would still be able to hug their mom, their dad, their grandma, their grandpa, and I'm fighting for those people so that they can continue hugging them.
Tonight, we're fighting for a care and a cure in memory of the 8 family members for whom we and our immediate families cared, who either had Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia.
I'm fighting for the possibility to spread happiness despite having this disease.
I am fighting for a future we can all remember.
I'm fighting in memory of my father, Vic Coda, who we lost this past July to dementia.
And I'm fighting for a cure in honor of my dad, who died of AD 3 years ago.
I'm fighting for a world without Alzheimer's for all communities, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or zip code.
I am fighting for my grandparents who I have cared for, and for all other millennials and Gen Zs who will disproportionately bear the burden of Alzheimer's.
I'm fighting for my mom, my dad, my father-in-law, who all died with dementia.
I'm fighting for the right to have my body not outlive my mind.
Studies suggest that Latinos in the U.S. are 1.5 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease than white non-Latinos. If there was no Alzheimer's, our abuelitos would live a better quality of life. They are whom I'm fighting for.
I fight in memory of my mother and father, and in honor of all those people who made my parents' struggle with dementia just a little bit easier.
I am fighting for my grandfather who suffered from dementia, but also for the almost 6 million people suffering from the disease in the US and the over 15 million unpaid family caregivers.
I am fighting in memory of my parents.
We are fighting for my mom and all those who live with this disease. We need more research. We need more resources and tools to support people living with all forms of dementia and their family caregivers.
3 generations of my family over 40 years, I'm fighting against this disease for my kids and my grandkids. Join us.
There are more than 50 million Americans providing unpaid care for a loved one. 41 million care for a loved one over 50, making elder care a significant workforce challenge since 60% of caregivers provide care while also holding down a job. This is a growing challenge for the dementia community, as more than 16 million Americans care for a loved one living with dementia, often with little training or community support. 19% of women providing dementia care have had to leave their jobs to care for a loved one. Black and Latino caregivers are more likely to report financial impacts as a result of providing care compared to non-Hispanic white caregivers. With 12 million millennials providing dementia care, even young people are feeling the impacts, especially at work. 33% of millennial dementia caregivers have reported work disruptions due to caregiving, and 14% have stopped working entirely. Despite this great need, we've failed to establish a national paid family and medical leave program and flexible workforce policies. Less than half of employed dementia caregivers report receiving paid family or medical leave to help balance work and family duties. 60% experience problems related to financial pressures caused by not being able to work or having to reduce their hours. This is especially burdensome for communities of color, as Blacks are 2 to 3 times more likely and Latinos are 1.5 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's than non-Hispanic whites. The United States is the only industrialized nation to not have a policy supporting paid family and medical leave for its workers. As our nation ages and millions more try to balance care and work, now is the time to support our nation's caregivers and not force choices that are impossible to make. Our families can't wait. Now is the time.
My name is Rochelle Long. I am a caregiver for my mom who has Alzheimer's. I've been on this journey for almost 18 years. My mom is one of 5 sisters, and 4 of which, plus their mother, were all diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The mother and 2 sisters have since passed. The 4th sister is in a nursing home. She's 92 years old. And as of last month, a 3rd generation has been diagnosed. So it's 3 generations on my mother's side. People talk about what they've lost in the last year. I have to say goodbye to another part of my mother every day, because sometimes she knows me and sometimes she doesn't. I'm used to it, but it doesn't make it any better. I spend most of my PTO, which is paid time off, doing doctor's appointments, clinical trials, anything that relates to my mom and her needs. It's of lately, it's starting to get taxing. I have not, because of COVID, been able to take any type of break. We were actually quarantined at home for the last 14 months. She just recently went back into the adult day program, which is how I'm able to go to work. I can't stress it enough until you experience it. Most people don't understand how taxing it is to have to go to work and take care of somebody. Some nights I only get maybe 2 hours of sleep at a time because I get up with my mom and go back to bed, get up again sometimes. When my mom gets sick, I have to be there. That's my PTO. That means I can't take off. In the last 15 plus years, I've had 1 vacation for 10 days. That was the best thing in my life. I was rejuvenated. Paid family medical leave would really have helped. Because I've been paying out of pocket for almost the last year. So whatever income I have, I've been paying out of pocket to get my mom cared for, because I couldn't afford not to work. I think it's wrong that we support people coming into this world, but we give up on them at the end of life or in the so-called golden years, because those are the years that they need us. They gave us everything we have. We should be able to give it back to them, and not everybody can't afford to stay home and take care of a parent or a grandparent or a disabled loved one. Everybody can't. I couldn't. The message I have is, if you don't do it now, when and if it happens to you, it'll be too late. For you'll be in the position that I'm in now. Legislation needs to be passed, because the dependency on us to take care of, baby boomers, my generation, to take care of the one above me, my parent, and my daughter to take care of my generation is growing. The need is growing and the supply is lessening. So when it's your turn, and it will happen to somebody on this committee, and you don't do it now, it'll be too late then.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Jason Resendez, and I'm the Executive Director of the Us Against Alzheimer's Center for Brain Health Equity, which is building equity for communities of color and women who have been historically underserved by Alzheimer's health services, research, and formal care supports. I am beyond honored to be joined today by Dolores Huerta, one of America's leading voices and change agents for social justice. As co-founder of United Farm Workers with Cesar Chavez and founder of the Dolores Huerta Foundation, her work to build power for those who often go unseen in our society has made our country a more just, equitable, and welcoming place. Welcome, Dolores.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
You have inspired so many, including me, through your work. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and your life's mission?
Well, I was very fortunate in my career, so to speak, to be able to be taught how to do grassroots organizing, how to bring people together. And we do it through what we call house meetings, something like Tupperware parties, for those people that know what that is, and to inform them, get them to understand what the situations are and what they can do to change their family situation, their community situation, and any challenges that they have in their community. And it's been very, very effective. We've been able to pass many important pieces of legislation through this process, and also making people understand that they have a responsibility, of course, to their communities, but also to engage in voting, to engage in advocating for legislation, for laws that will help us move forward, especially when it comes to caring for our families.
Amazing. And I know you've been with us before. You've talked a little bit about your personal connection to Alzheimer's. How has that experience of organizing and engaging communities shaped your views on supporting caregivers and families touched with diseases like Alzheimer's?
Well, I think now more than ever, we have seen how important it is to have caregivers supported in our community, because we know often they are not supported. Many of them are not in organizations that can represent them. We know that they are not paid enough, but they are a very critical part of our society, because we know that more and more people are going to be affected with Alzheimer's. We know that what's happened with the pandemic, that we have seen that so many people that were in nursing homes, where a lot of people that have Alzheimer's, they end up in nursing home, and yet we found out that so many people were dying because of COVID. So many of the people that were attending them also were infected with COVID-19, and the whole system. I think one thing that the pandemic exposed, that there is many things that we have to change about the way that Alzheimer patients are treated. And they don't deserve to have a death sentence because they have Alzheimer's, or don't be put into facilities that are not safe for them to be in, or where the people that are supposed to be taking care of them don't have the proper training. And so when we know that Alzheimer's is something that's going to be with us for quite a while, until there is a cure for Alzheimer's, that we have to do everything that we can to make sure that people that are exposed or that get Alzheimer's, because we know it's something that's internal, until we find a cure for it, we have to do everything that we can, especially to support and to train the caregivers so that they don't have to have a death sentence when they have Alzheimer's, okay? That's the main thing. And we have to do everything that we can to raise awareness and to get the funding, especially for the caregivers that are going to be taking care of them.
Absolutely. I love your energy and your words. We have to do everything that we can. And that's why at Us Against Alzheimer's, we've been fighting for paid family and medical leave for caregivers, because we know that growing impact on dementia care disproportionately impacts Black and Brown women who are often having to navigate care while working. I know you've also been outspoken about the need for paid family leave and paid sick days. Why do you think paid family leave can make a difference for family caregivers providing care across the lifespan?
Well, we know that the best person to take care of someone that is affected with dementia or Alzheimer's is a family member, because they know what their likes are or their dislikes, what their personalities are like, and how to make them more comfortable while they navigate this disease. So paid family leave is absolutely crucial. And we do know that right now we do have the human infrastructure bill that is now in the Senate. And you know, it's going to be voted on by our Congress, and this would provide some of the funding that I was talking about that is needed. So I think it's really, really important. All of us, and I guess everybody should care about Alzheimer's, okay? It's not selective, you might say. Almost every single family in one way or the other is going to be affected by Alzheimer's. So if we can all come together and support the human infrastructure bill, the $3.5 trillion, which sounds like a lot of money, but it really isn't, because it's going to be extended over 10 years, 10 years. And so that we can start doing something tangible, something immediate, that we know what the support that our Alzheimer patients need. We know the support that they need. So all we have to do is act on it by getting everybody to call their senators and say, please vote on this important $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill. And I like to say human infrastructure because a lot of people say, okay, well, we're going to have the infrastructure bill for the bridges and you know, transportation that we need. But I like to quote Senator Bernie Sanders, who said, it doesn't do you any good to build a nice bridge for people to sleep under it or to live under that bridge.
Everybody should care about Alzheimer's. I couldn't agree with you more. Everyone should care about Alzheimer's. It's something that's impacting our entire society, as our audience knows well. And I like to think about our work as fighting Alzheimer's is that we're fighting for families to have the right to remember their stories, remember their families. Because one of the cruelest aspects of Alzheimer's is that it robs you of your memory. So thinking about memory, Dolores, do you have a particular memory that keeps you strong during hard fights, like the fight right now for human infrastructure? You know, what memories do you find to be the ones that give you strength?
Well, we know that luckily over my life, I have been able to fight to get the type of support systems that we need, and which many people thought that were impossible. Back in the early 60s, we passed a bill here in California that became a national bill afterwards, that if people who were legal immigrants to the United States of America, if you had your green card and you were a legal resident, that you could get public assistance, because there were many, many of our elders whose children had gone off to war in World War II, and they had fought there and died there, and yet they were not eligible for any kind of old age assistance. And so we were able to pass that law just by coming together, but just by what I've been espousing a few minutes ago. And so that not only could elders get some kind of a pension, but they could also get disability assistance, and also age and needy children, you know, and this was an important piece of legislation. So sometimes when we think things are really impossible, they never are impossible, because that's a good thing about living in a democracy. We are the ones that can make sure that the kind of resources that we need, that we can make that happen, again, by calling on our senators and our Congress and our state legislators to give us the resources that we need.
Fantastic. I love how your memories are memories of fighting for social change and making folks' lives better. What an amazing journey that you've been on. And congratulations on your 91st birthday, that you are still out there in La Lucha doing the work and fighting for people. And that must be an extremely busy days, long weeks. What do you do to take care of your brain health during those long days and long weeks fighting for families and communities?
Well, I think it's important that we be active and that we be informed. So I love music. So when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do is turn on the radio and I listen to National Public Radio. I hear the music, and I make music a part of my life every single day. Of course, I'm like many of us, we're just on the Zooms and following the news and seeing what's going on, and then doing my part, that whatever I can do. I just came back from Arizona, where we had a press conference day before yesterday in front of Christian Cinema, Senator Christian Cinema's office, okay, with a lot of the organizations there that are trying to get her to vote again for this human infrastructure bill. So I think the main thing to do is stay active. I read as much as I can whenever I can get a break from Zooming and the other work. But I think the main thing is to do, we have to keep our brains active all of the time, and then do as much physical activity as we can. I try to exercise in the morning. Every morning I try to do my exercises and walk as much as possible and dance as much as possible. Any opportunity that I can, if there's some good dancing music on the radio, I'm out here dancing all by myself in my living room. Okay.
I love it.
You have to keep physically active.
I would love to dance with you sometime, Dolores. I think that's fantastic. I'm thinking about the senators, thinking about policymakers. What message do you have for them in this moment?
Well, we have to appeal to their consciousness and also to their own family histories, because I'm sure that everybody has somebody in their family or somebody that they know that was affected with Alzheimer's. And to always remind them that as servants of the people, that their job is that's why they're elected, is to take care of the most vulnerable persons in our society. And who can think of people that are most vulnerable than people that have been affected by Alzheimer's?
In thinking about our audience, we have advocates from across the nation who want to make a difference on Alzheimer's. And you're just an amazing role model for anyone who wants to make a difference on any issue. Given your deep experience in advocacy, what's your number one lesson to share with these hopeful change agents who want to make a difference?
Well, we all have to become messengers. We all have to become ambassadors. We have the knowledge, and we're getting a lot of knowledge here today in this event, and to share that knowledge and to call someone that we know and have them call somebody else so that we can spread the message out there. And also because a lot of times, I think a lot of people think, oh my God, there's nothing you can do about Alzheimer's, okay? There's nothing that you can do. But we can say, no, there is something that you can do right now, because we can fight for this important paid family leave. It's important that we fight for the home care workers. And this is something that all of us can do. Si se puede. Remember, you have the power. We have the power. We have the people power to make this happen. Yes,
si se puede. Dolores, thank you so much for being with us today.
No,
it's been an honor. It's been an honor to be with you. And I have to say on a personal note, my life, my work has been shaped by your actions and inspired by your spirit. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And if people want to learn more about the Dolores Huerta Foundation, we're on the web at doloreshuerta.org, doloreshuerta.org. Okay. And I know that this is a mission that we all have, and it's something that we can all do something about, and we can feel very, very good that we accomplished something very, very important. So thank you very much for having me be part of your event.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Sometimes things that you think are not possible are possible. That's what I took out of that last one, at least. And many people would have said a while ago that ending Alzheimer's is not possible. And I think what we heard today is maybe not today, but certainly not impossible. So you may notice I've changed. I have a different background. I am here at the site for our gala tonight, and you're all welcome to join us. Talk more about that in just a second. If you hear any noises in the background, it's because they're busy moving tables and doing all the things that they do to set up for a gala. So thanks for sticking with us. Wanted to kind of review the day for just a second and then talk about what tomorrow's going to be. We heard our first panel talk about there are many different sort of, George Vradenburg sometimes talks about shots on goal. There's a lot of stuff in the pipeline right now, and that's what we wanted to hear about. Are we ready to end Alzheimer's? Well, not quite. And I think that we heard the folks on the first panel say there is no silver bullet, and there probably isn't going to be a silver bullet. There's probably going to be multiple pathways. But we also heard a lot of optimism around those pathways. And not just the pathways, but the impact of biomarkers, whether they're blood biomarkers or other fluids or digital biomarkers. Brian Kelly talked about the possibility of understanding things from the way you interact with your phone or something like that. So different kinds of markers will help us track this disease, sort of like we do with heart disease. You don't wait until see if somebody gets a heart attack and then try to diagnose it. You monitor cholesterol, you monitor blood pressure. We're developing those things in Alzheimer's. We talked about the way drug developers think about it. They had the 4 R's, the right population, the right dose, the right hypothesis, and the right target. And we're learning so much to inform those choices as we go. We learned about genetics and the role that genetics plays. We're starting to understand better what might predispose you and what might not predispose you. But then we heard in the second panel that genetics is not destiny, at least for a lot of people, that there are things that you can do. Your brain is always evolving. It's not stuck in one place. It's not irreversible course. It's something we can do. Dr. Haas said that genetic effects are less, at least for some people, than the effects of interventions that we can take. We're not fixed, but we do have some hurdles there too. So in the drug development, the hurdles still are we don't know enough. We have a lot more to learn, but we're learning a lot more than we had. In the sort of what can we do, there's a hurdle with doctors. Doctors don't know what to tell their patients. Doctors don't interact with their patients around this as much as sort of we in the Alzheimer's field think that they should. And people don't raise it with their doctors because maybe they're scared. Maybe there's stigma. So there's some hurdles around stigma, hurdles around sort of what physicians know, but those can be overcome. When we think about, are we ready to end Alzheimer's? It's not just about what the first panel talked about and finding the right hypothesis and the right dose and the right population and the right target. It's also, once we figure that out, getting it to the right people. And the right people is anyone that'll benefit from the drug, not just the people who are paying the closest attention, the people who have the best doctors at the best academic medical centers in the country. And then we heard from Dolores that, yeah, we can. It may be hard. Are we ready to end Alzheimer's? Maybe not today, but we can and we must. We can't not. So tonight, I mentioned the gala. I'm here at the site of the gala. You are all welcome to join the gala. It is at 8 p.m. Eastern. And there is the address. We'll be honoring Dr. David Satcher, the 16th Surgeon General of the United States, and Us Against Alzheimer's board member, Senator Bob Menendez with our award. But you may want to attend because Billy Crystal is going to be there. Just he's kind of funny and has a movie that speaks to Alzheimer's and some other special guests as well. Should be a fun night. So please tune in for that tonight. Then tomorrow we come back at 1:00 in the afternoon with opening remarks from one of our founding board members, Meryl Comer, and then 2 more events. One I'll be hosting with people looking at technology, because I think part of the hurdle, but also part of the possible success in Are We Ready to End Alzheimer's is developing this technology. It has a little to do with the biomarkers. It has to do with lots of different things. And we'll talk about that tomorrow at 1:30 Eastern. Then at 2:30, Dr. Satcher, who we're honoring tonight, will be in conversation with a journalist and his predecessor, Dr. Joycelyn Elders, the former Surgeon General of the United States, his immediate predecessor. Then I'll come back and sort of try to wrap up what we've learned. I think from today, are ready to end Alzheimer's? Not quite, but we're really making progress. Look forward to hearing what they have to say tomorrow. Look forward to hearing what you have to say in the chat. We will be looking at those. We try to inform our questions in the conversations with these experts from the questions you type into the chat. If we don't get to your question, we'll do what we can to get the answer. Thanks for coming today. Join us tonight if you can, 8 p.m. Eastern for the gala, usagainst-alzheimers.org. You'll find the link there. And we'll see you otherwise tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern.
Thank you.